Old habits die hard.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Signature West Podcast. I'm your host, Sam West from Palm Springs, California. Today's episode is about a topic that most of us, if not all, do not like talking about, let alone admit the fact that we all experience it in some shape or form, and that is trauma. And with trauma comes shame, and the burden of carrying the shame around day after day, year after year, generation after generation. It gets really, really messy. So today, my guest is a friend of mine and psychologist, Dr. Richard Oelberger. Hi, Richard. And he's a specialist on trauma and healing and all that good stuff. Hi, Richard.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing some of my own trauma healing out here. I made a commitment to myself to make it to the ocean water yesterday, and so
I'm jealous. So, as you probably know, I'm obsessed lately with the term trauma because I've learned so much in the last 2 months. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but let's just define what trauma is, because a lot of people, including myself, used to think unless I came back from Vietnam or Iraq, then I'm trauma-free, which is completely wrong. So what is trauma in your world?
Well, it's interesting how working in the field of psychology that a lot of us as therapists are not trained in trauma. And so, for me, my introduction into trauma was through a lot of the work I did in crisis. And there's a saying, be careful, when you work in crisis, you become a crisis. So in working with homeless individuals and working with suicidal teenagers, in being confronted with that, there's a whole nother aspect of what trauma is in terms of how you absorb it as a practitioner. And I help a lot of doctors and therapists with that kind of secondary trauma. And so, first thing you asked is, so trauma can be any form of, there's so many different categories. So I've even been following your work and I'm like, oh, well, right. Is it in my wheelhouse? Is that trauma something that I have knowledge about? Because there are so many different experiences, but I think it's a rupture in any sense of safety or feeling as if you could not protect yourself or were not protected when you needed it most. So
I think that's genius.
Yeah. So yeah, anything that's too fast, too quick before our defenses. So I read this paragraph to a lot of my clients and I wish I had it right now, and it's a little bit too heady. So I don't want to do that to your listeners, but it's kind of like anything that happened before, sometimes like we have these messages or these inhibitions to hit the brake in the car or to hit the fist up to protect somebody from striking us. And then we don't do it for whatever reason, either because it was someone we trusted, someone we thought we could be safe around. And so our brain tags those responses, protective responses, as not effective. So it doesn't utilize it in the future. So people, a lot of times, right, we'll have clients, the clients that will come and they'll be, saying, well, why is this trauma now showing up for me as an adult when it happened, it was something I experienced as a child, or how come I'm experiencing something that maybe I'm finally becoming tapped into something that my culture or my family went through, and it gets absorbed. So a lot of what I do is work with how trauma gets kind of absorbed in the body and stored. So there's a lot of, Bessel van der Kolk and the body keeps score, or Gabor Mate, and when the body says no. A lot of learning, so much of my training as a Western psychologist about your head and your thoughts and your beliefs, when this knowledge that no, it's our body that holds so much sacred wisdom and so much understanding, that if we could unlock it, if we could care for it, if we could find a safe space or container to create a way to, yeah.
But is it also true, I've learned that trauma can actually happen like pre-birth? Like it could really happen before the person hits planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, that's not my areas of, well, right. You mean like in utero?
Yeah, it does. So I just want to make sure that people understand trauma is not something that you have to actually experience it after you're an adult or after you become a man or a woman, but it actually happened depending on your environment and what you were brought into and how you were carried, et cetera, et cetera. Is that
Oh, like a lot of studies on the tone of voice of the
exactly
parents, right?
right?
The womb, the
Right,
energy, the stress levels, the
right,
cortisol levels of the
right,
parents
right.
can lead
Which
to, yeah.
which brings me to my next point. Now, in your field, PTSD, the term, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, is now being changed to PTSI, which post-traumatic stress injury.
Yeah, thank you
Elaborate
for
on that.
that. Yeah, I mean, you're introducing something to me that I didn't know had taken place in the diagnostic manuals, but I'm glad that it is, because in general, the whole field of mental health or traumatic experiences being something that there's wrong with you, or that you're disordered, or that
Right.
there's something deficient in the person experiencing it, has been something I've tried to distance myself from, and I think it's part of the stigma, which pushes a lot of people away from getting help, because I went and I experienced this collective, gross atrocity, there's something disordered in me. Even for veterans, right, that's a big challenge. People
It's a
say, why did
huge
be
issue. Yep.
Mhm.
So is that explain why shame is so associated with trauma? And we're always, including myself, which I'll get to in a minute, it's such a shame to talk about or to even go to therapy or to even admit that I was traumatized in that way.
It's multiple levels, right? Because you could say, well, if society makes it shameful, but in my family they say, you know what, Sam, you have something to talk about, you come cry about it, they make it okay. If you have this corrective experience in your environment, maybe it changes a little bit of what's happening in the greater picture. But I don't think, for the general public who looks at, right, if I go talk about this, I have to get a diagnosis, and then I have
What
to take
is wrong?
medication.
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you, right? That question. So definitely the term disorder or disease probably leads to, or at least is related to, stigma, whatever relationship we want to, which comes first.
Right. I just finished, I'm in the process of finishing this book, which it's been around for a long time. I'm just late to the game. It's called The Velvet Rage by Dr. Alan Jones. And he explains, which I want to get your feedback on it, because I just did the opposite 5 years ago. So there's what's called foreclosure versus resolution. And most of us, including myself, for example, when you move somewhere, which I did that, thinking I'm going to reinvent myself, I'm going to create more and not deal with my trauma, that's foreclosure. In fact, I have to make a U-turn, literally, U-turn and come back to resolve what trauma I've been through. And hopefully some people can resolve that where they went to, but in most cases we went away. So what's your take on the term foreclosure versus resolution?
Well, first of all, yeah, the term, I like the term for somatic experience, was my model of practice, is that that's what we're seeking. We call it trauma renegotiation. I like renegotiation too. I like resolve as well, right? But foreclosure, meaning that you're kind of running away from it and you're trying to just put a wall there.
Never saw it. I never imagined that that's what it would mean. It's
You
fascinating.
were in real estate.
Well, no, I mean, foreclose. You foreclose. You're done. Okay, it's over, and I'm moving on, and it's okay. You lose the house, whatever. It's even that is traumatizing in itself. It just dawned on me.
Yeah.
And we don't think of it as that foreclosure is traumatizing, ego-wise, financially, all of the above, but yet as a society, we'll move on, we'll buy the next house, or we'll repair our credit and we go on. So go on, continue.
Yeah. So a lot of the whole like trying to solve problems geographically, I had those fantasies as well. Or, if I go somewhere, if I have a new, you're right, if the picture looks different, that's going to heal me, and it does temporarily. I mean,
Temporarily is the word.
it does temporarily. So I like, and I want to first of all validate anyone who feels they've had to do that or do that multiple times, because it is tempting, right? It's tempting when the triggers start to come up and we don't know what the feelings are and we don't know why we have them. And we have no idea how to handle them. And no one's ever taught us how to be safe. And we've never found that space. Why running and moving is healthy. In a way it is, because our body needs to feel that activated fight, flight, or freeze response. So the movement is flight.
But it's
So in a
temporarily
way,
though.
it's temporary, right? So every time we do it, we feel the relief, though. I just
Right.
want to validate those who feel like, wait a minute, but I do get something from that. You do, So right, it's temporary in that we're not really resolving what we needed when that wound occurred, and
Right.
we're not really understanding our deeper wound. You said injury, right? This key term, because injury means there's something there. I need to understand the muscle. I need to understand what's happening to the surrounding tissue. I need to understand a little bit more about the conditions of what was going on, and maybe I can connect more deeply. Maybe I can feel more deeply my own pain. And I think
But
it's
if it's so
this.
painful for most people, how do I seek the feeling when it's just so painful? I said, Richard, I just can't. I don't want to even talk about it. It's just so painful to bring that up. How do people reach that gap and say, screw it? You know, we lost you for a second.
I
There we go.
Yeah. So
How,
I think the key is that part of, whether it be EMDR or somatic experience or any trauma, and I talk about the container, the safety of working with a therapist or somebody where there's a beginning there. First of all, is it doesn't have to be all pain. A lot of times, I make sure that it's like dipping into the pool. My clients need to trust that we're going to take a journey, and we need to, slowly build the capacity to get a little bit deeper, go a little bit, and then come back out. And our body needs to kind of follow suit. Okay, that wasn't so bad, or we touched upon it,
right?
but we don't stay there, because staying too close to the fire too long, too
It's a
quickly,
lot.
and it's important. I'm remiss as a therapist if I don't tell my clients, look, when we finish this first session where you just downloaded so much stuff,
It's a lot.
like it's a lot, and if
Lot.
you don't, in the next few days, this is not going to feel better. So I want to make sure, number one, either
And I'm not
we
going to come
stop you.
back. I'm not coming
Yeah,
back.
right. Well, that's why I always tell you, the average amount of
Right.
therapy sessions is
Right.
one, because you finally make the call. You finally made many calls and you finally make it to the session, and then you're so hyper vigilant for how that individual may violate your trust or could do wrong. It's really sensitive.
And it's so much
Um,
easier for people to say, you know what, Richard, it was a lot. Let me go back to my smoking pot, which is nothing wrong with smoking pot
or even, or
or
the other
whatever.
logical reasons. I'm so busy. I'm over
Right.
managing. I've got life stressors. I mean, there's a lot of realistic things. Right. I got my job. I'm coming
Right.
out of
Any
COVID. There's all these
excuses to not
reasons.
to deal. Right. Right. Um, California just opened yesterday, finally.
Yeah, it's kind of
God.
awkward. Yeah.
Oh my God. So post COVID, and I said this last May, maybe when we just started, the slogan that we're all in this together is such a misconception. I live alone in isolation. You're married with 3 children, twins in isolation. It's not the same. Yours are no different than mine. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. We're just a very different dynamics. So, what damage has been done that we're not talking about coming out of a year and a half of this?
I mean, I do a lot of work with men. I think isolation is traumatic, right? We need to socially engage. We get so much information. We get so much experience of warmth or connection, right? It's like even the possibility for hope, or that we're not alone. And so learning how to survive and stay, we did it because it was necessary. Um, but you're right. Somebody who was living by themselves, I can't imagine what they're carrying, and it does depend on also perception. Do you feel that you're alone but you're also connected, right? So much of technology now, right? I'm getting out of
But that's
rooms
not
with,
the same. That's just like so. It's
yeah,
really just not.
it yeah,
I think it's
it's not
adding
the
more.
same.
It helped, but it's adding more injury to the injury because I'm still not connected, but it's the best I can do. But I'm
Right,
really disconnected because I'm not seeing you. I'm not feeling you. I can't even smell you. But that's all I got to work with.
right. So I think, right, the first thing is for each individual to acknowledge, right, what's their wound, right? What are they carrying? Are they carrying depression from being isolated? Are they carrying angry? Do they feel abandoned? And something like this, that is a, right, COVID came in if you were like me or you, in some ways it is similar in that it came quick and fast and we weren't prepared. I think there are elements of it that everybody kind of had to make adaptations. So there's a kind of figuring out, well, what did you lose? What am I grieving? Right. There's a grief that's going on. Am I grieving connection? Am I grieving hugging people? Am I grieving seeing family members? Like, where is the pain? And what am I needing most right now? What can I start to achieve? Like you said, we are real busy. It is not just an excuse. I could start with one thing, right? Is it being social with one friend? Is it, I think you used to play tennis, right? Is it tennis or a hike? Is there some way to get connection to other men or groups? For me, having that connection, somebody that I could go for a walk with and just be, and not have to carry the burdens of
The
caring
burden.
for others. The
What do you tell
burdens.
the ones that, I'm afraid I saw it already happening, that we went through the isolation, the damage, so to speak, and then we pushed a button because we came out and we pretend it didn't happen. It's like almost it did not happen, and because we want to protect ourselves, I'm going to pretend it never happened. They didn't break up with me. This was okay. It's like almost like we lose our memory bank just to avoid the trauma of what really
Right.
happened.
And some of that again is adaptive. I heard somebody talking on the Dak Shepherd podcast yesterday about parenthood, right? Motherhood, like that you forget, like even like a few months later, the waking up at night, the experiences like this. So I do think that there's some denial is helpful for some. I know some people remained in that like
Denial is
deny.
helpful.
It's helpful in that it protects you from feeling all the painful or traumatic feelings.
But as
So
we
if we
said
were
earlier,
all
it's going to come back. You cannot, what's the word? Resolve, not foreclose.
No, it's not resolved, but temporarily. I was curious. I mean, I can see it, and I try not to judge in others what is also happening in me. That the idea of that it's over and I want to get back to my life is
Right.
tempting because it means, first of all, who doesn't want
To be normal.
Disneyland? Yeah, you want to be normal, and you're missing everything so much. So you want it all at once. We don't have this filter. Part of renegotiating a resolution is learning how, I mean, Peter Levine used the term titration, right? Which is like slowly letting something in, because this idea that you could fully be exposed, right? Are you bringing with you? Are you fully out there and doing everything and fully bringing with you your grief, your pain, your loss, your hurt, your sadness? Did you even acknowledge that you had those things?
Acknowledge is a good word.
Right. For me, it felt so meaningful, like small interactions. The gentleman in my office who was by the water cooler, who delivered one time my mail from my old office, to express gratitude to that
Right.
human being,
Right.
it meant something. So I think acknowledging, taking the time, and whether, if you don't have these skills or tools to slow down and look inside about your feelings and what you've been going through, and what does isolation bring up for you? What
Right.
behaviors did you start to pick up? Maybe a mask feeling that you
So,
maybe want to start shifting now.
so obviously, for the healing process, how damaging, and I can tell you from my own personal experiences, it was very damaging, medication can be for the ones that seek medication. I'm not saying don't seek medication, but how damaging it could be if it's not properly used. And in my case, luckily for me, I was able to just say stop and regroup. So it was very few weeks of damage as opposed to years of damage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Sam, you know me for a long time. I've been trained in spiritual psychology, and at times I took that to mean, and I still believe in a lot of ways that from my training and consciousness studies, that there's so much out there naturally that can heal us. And if we could resolve all our traumas and get what we needed from spiritual community or the environment or exercise, that we could heal ourselves in some capacity. But, I'm always really clear with my content. I'm not anti-medication. If you're in that level of impairment and you need something to help you either stop the noise or to really break an anxiety or depression cycle, that's what it's there for. And finding a skilled psychiatrist or integrative practitioner that can talk to you about side effects or looks at your medication interactions, because
That's
I
the
do
key.
think Yeah,
That's
it's the freedom of that discussion, exploration about what are you doing, and I do like that you said there's this choice. I always want to have this boundary. Can I have this discussion? I'm feeling better. I want to go back down. Can I lessen this? I think it always should be that we're not in this habit, which is, I think, you knew my father. My father shaped my journey as a therapist and a man that this, I don't want to become or recommend people to become the pill box collector.
but unfortunately, and I tell you from my personal experience, I'm not even making this up, that there is here, a sample of box, try this. Not even knowing, tries was the word, not even knowing what, I'm going to get to that in a minute, not what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you. I mean, what's wrong with you versus what happened to you. And we're just fixing what's wrong with you. And it could be a really slippery slope. And it could turn out really messy.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this ties to, even cultural competence, talking about trauma training. I mean, these are things that are not necessarily taught to all psychologists, let alone psychiatrists. One of my former podcast guests, a guy named Twig Wheeler, he went to deal with the victims of genocide and rape in Rwanda. And he sent in the best team of practitioners. And they sat there trying to talk, and nobody would talk with the in their environment, going to them with the language, with everything. And then they realized they could only get them to express this group through culturally relevant ways. So
they
dance.
Can relate to.
Yes, they could relate to one another, because it's also the safety amongst those who've been through the trauma with you. So, I mean, you talk about that, but there's somebody who's sitting in an office who's getting 15 minutes and an insurance copay or whatever, even if they're overcharging you, are they tapped into all that? There's different they're treating the chemicals, they're treating what they're seeing. You got low serotonin, I'm giving you something that boosts serotonin. So I don't want to judge the establishment, but we do know that the diagnostic manuals are funded by these companies. We do know that even on Skid Row that we had a plentiful buffet every Wednesday hosted by a company.
Is that crazy?
So yeah, I'm hoping, that the rest of the world is catching up with these modalities and shifting it. And it happened. And this podcast is right on time, because the pandemic, I do feel that in a lot of times when I meet somebody, I'm like, where were you before the war? It's an unseen, we all went into something, right? In that ways, it's very different, but I'm like, whoa, you just even mentioned to me, I have no idea what the war was like for you, because we all went into our bunker. Or even if you were still running around, or like it didn't happen,
or even being abandoned as a child or as an adult, whatever. I mean, that was a trigger for me, and it felt like, it's a very, I call it the biggest mind F ever.
Right, because you didn't even realize you were like back in something that you thought you were coping with. But you were managing. We did the best we can.
And you don't know. When you don't know, you don't know. Right. And that's why this last 2 months for me has been amazing, because now, I think I told you, I read the book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, and it's titled "What Happened to You," and it's about the premise. Instead of asking what is wrong with you, they're talking about what happened to you, and from there you can build on and build on. So the silver lining in all this, there's a silver lining, people, that obviously medication does work for some, therapy does work, but what Dr. Bruce Perry made it so interestingly clear, and to me it was a wow moment. The ultimate cure, and I'm sure you would agree with me, but I want to get your feedback on this, is building healthy relationships. And I was like, this is it.
Well, being in a support, so you mentioned abandonment, you mentioned developmental trauma. When we have supports, when we feel connected to or understood in our engagements, I think it shifts, this isn't a scientific, it shifts our DNA, it shifts our own self-understanding, our feeling of belongingness, our feeling of identity, our feeling of being able to tap into our parasympathetic nervous system and take that deep, like, I can be here and be present and not be delving into the whole EMDR method of therapy. What are the negative thoughts? Oh, if I'm alone, if I'm abandoned, then we start to There must be something wrong with me. There must be, I'm wanted. And then we
I'm not fit.
internalize.
I'm not worthy of. I'm not even equipped, and therefore I'm going to pull back.
Right.
I'm
If
going to get
somebody gets close to
medication to
me,
calm me down, and then it goes on and on and on. And that's why earlier I was saying the medication, if that's all I'm going to relate to and medicate myself, as opposed to go and build support system, it's a vicious cycle. Nothing is going to ever get resolved.
right.
At
That's
least
it.
how I
So
take mine.
medication, I think that the most studies, right, say like even the CBT plus medication is the most efficacious model for depression. At least when I took
Right.
the licensing exam, that's the studies, right? So, I do agree that if you're so depressed or so anxious that you can't sit in the seat, it's going to be very hard to start doing breathing exercises and tapping into grounding and even getting to what your belief systems are. Because
Absolutely.
when you are so far on the extreme of one end of either being, remember, anxiety, is like you're being turned on too high. You're driving at 90 miles an hour to tell yourself, that you need to somehow slow down and drive 55. There's
Good
all these
luck.
defenses. Yes, defenses around that. What do you mean? I'm anxious because I need to look at everything and check everything and keep safe. It becomes a belief system. This way of operating is protecting me. And so until we
Well,
can
that's what
tap
I've been
into
used
that,
to. I mean, that's
right,
like basically I'm this way. I go 9 miles an hour for that reason, not even knowing why. And I just realized because is my safety system. If I slow down, I don't feel safe. And luckily with these
right.
books.
And what would it mean? It has cultural meaning, right? When I ask some of my clients who are physicians, or what do you mean? Yeah, I'm going to say no to the 20th patient of my day. And it's tied into identity, right? If I say no, what if I could have helped? What if I could have done something? My value is as a provider. My value is as a physician. So my identity is my profession. Now that can be very cultural. That can be, I'm only good if I perform. That happens for athletes too. That happens for actors,
Right.
right? Right. So realizing that there's a pain there, right?
Injury.
Realizing there's an injury. Thank you.
Injury.
That there's an injury, that I'm injured. That it's not bad that I'm great at my profession. It's not bad that I have this tremendous skill, but I am hurting.
It's not a
I'm still
disorder.
hurting.
It's an injury. I just want to make
It's an
that note.
injury,
It's
and
not
it's
a
not a big
disorder.
shift. It's
Right.
not a major shift. It's not that there's something wrong. These are like micro changes. These micro gestures, which probably were just tuned down too low, we don't notice it. It's in the background. Something is saying, I need a break right now. I need a moment. I need 5 minutes. I can't take that next phone call. And then something overrides it and goes, but you have to. And so it's that discussion, which only we know that we're having inside of ourselves. And we only know where those micro gestures might be, whether
How do I
that's,
tell myself, don't take that phone call? Go have a timeout.
I think, I think the idea is to tap into when you're making changes. If I just say, well, I'm going to change by not doing something, it's not as motivating, right? I'm not going to eat the chocolate cake. It's like, well, why? Okay, well, I want to gain on a scale and 5 pounds and 10 pounds in a month or two. That doesn't help me. But if I tap into an identity change, which is what we're talking about, the beliefs that I am good enough, that I'm worth the self-care, that I'm worth having a boundary.
But
I may not even believe it.
But how do I tell myself that, oh, okay, so if I don't believe it, I'm going to just tuck myself into it, so to speak?
Well, in a way, because I'm deciding that this change, this pain, right? The pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change.
There you
That in
go.
a way, that this one small change, that right now, cutting work at 6 p.m. or not taking phone calls after 10 p.m. is going to give me more space to slow down. I don't even know what it looks like. I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know which app to do to
It might be
breathe.
very terrible. It might be very painful. I might be
It's going
very
to be
anxious.
painful.
Okay.
It's going to evoke anxiety. Whenever you make a change, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have the urge to cover up the feeling because of these reasons we said. That, Peter Levine calls it overcoupling, right? If I make this change, that means I'm not a great doctor. I'm not a great, right? I'm not a great friend, not a great partner, right? If I do this, right, we get, we call it codependency or whatever it is. Our identity becomes fused to something which is giving us a lot, but in a way, it's kind of a mask. because it's covering up that injury. So I think it's about saying it's okay. I can be a great friend and I can be
And not
healthy.
call you back right away.
Right. In
Just
fact,
wait
because my first commitment is to
to
myself and my
me.
healing.
Right.
When you do make change, you may get some, right. It's like when people are in your life don't understand that you're setting boundaries. I've never seen you do it. You may get some initial testing. They're going to perceive it as abandonment themselves. It could trigger, we trigger each other
And here
in
we go.
relationships, right?
Yeah.
It
And they don't
triggers a
even know they
cycle.
got triggered. They don't even know why they're getting triggered. They're going off on a tantrum because they're calling you a lousy friend, and how dare you, and we're going to break up. And then you look at them and say, and
Well,
it's a
that's why
big,
having therapy minded, I think that there is a certain, like, the calls I've been getting, I'm really refreshed by a lot of men in particular that are saying, gee, I don't even know how to ask for this. I just know that I wouldn't have in the past, and I would have used to judge myself for even thinking that I needed therapy or help, but I know I do. And so I kind of like these calls. I'm like, okay, I can work with you, because they're stepping into a place of uncomfortability. They're stepping into,
they're
I
willing to do the
know
work.
I'm open and I'm willing, right? As opposed to, you know what, Doc, your voice may have been a little bit, you called back 2 minutes too early, or you were a little bit too direct with me. And so that's it. I'm going to come one session, I'm out, because we're kind of vigilant for the trigger.
Right.
So instead going in, right, what's in this for me? Where can I look at my triggers? Where can I use these triggers as information and opportunity? That's kind of the frame that has to be there for trauma and healing. And I'm willing to see things I may not even be aware of about early life, or, I find myself, I mentioned going to the beach when we started this podcast, and I'm sitting out there and I'm tapping into, my father's been gone 2 years, more and more of who he was and the decisions he made and how he was. The more I stay in that frame, I can learn from what he experienced.
Interesting.
Through grief, we can learn more. Through our own grief, we can get deeper in understanding, but there has to be a language around it. We can have that conversation. You could say, Richard, I'm sorry I couldn't talk last night. I'm noticing I'm just grieving being around friends. I'm grieving my old
Grieving the
life.
loss
I'm
of a
grieving.
job. Yeah, to me, it's fascinating that we can't even, for me at least, I can speak for myself, that I spend my entire life not crying, because crying to me is not just don't cry. I don't know how to cry. But I finally sobbed and cried for a year and a half. Um, Grieving in itself, unless it's traumatic, but you can grieve for losing, of course, losing a pet is very traumatic. So grieving, some definition, people differentiate the definition of grieving, which is also misdiagnosed in itself, I think.
Yeah, I think they finally put bereavement as a diagnosis, but even then it's only for a short time, I think. And then if you continue to grieve, you're
It's a
depressed.
problem.
It's a
You go,
right.
you're not, you're nuts. You're not, something's wrong with you. Again, what's wrong with you versus
As
what's wrong
opposed to tapping into, like you said, the healing aspect of being in relationship, and to others who are willing to hold space,
right.
just that you could acknowledge sometimes that you don't have to go in depth into, you could just know that you're being witnessed, that somebody else knows you have this going on in the background, that there's that program of loss, right? I can still go out with you and we could do something healthy and develop some good behaviors that might be healthy for us,
Right.
but we can still carry that space. If you need to bring up that loss or that grief or that,
So
there's safety
how
there.
do you differentiate between staying in the story or I'm still grieving?
It's a good point. I think it's more that how we hold the beliefs about ourselves. So right, so you had an experience, you had something happen to you, like you mentioned. So I think the story is, but if we tell a story about ourselves, it somehow makes ourselves, we feel less about ourselves. We are the painful part about the experience is not just that we went through the loss, but these secondary traumas, right? Then I cut myself off from relationships. I couldn't stand losing again.
Right.
Or I started to believe I'm not lovable.
Right.
So that's when we talk about separating the story. It's by getting out this, like, wait a minute, right? That's a story, because, right, you losing someone at a young age had nothing to do with you, or someone abandoning you as a child, or you having to be parentified because your parent was an alcoholic or mentally ill.
Right.
we hold that as part, because we have no other way of knowing how to survive but by taking it on.
Or you can
So
talk about the story over and over again, but not doing anything about it, as opposed to getting, we talked about earlier, the support system, building the relationships, medication if it needs
right.
to be, therapy, counseling. That's more
Well,
doing the work as opposed to being stuck in the story.
right. And we tell the story because we want to be seen. We want people to see
Be
that we're
heard
wounded.
and
We want to
heard.
be heard. Right. So that's where I think it's like getting clear about your needs, that I do have needs. And I, right. If I could get clear, well, that's my need, but I don't have a need to tell that story in lieu of feeling better. Right. What if
Right.
there's a new story? What if there's a story of resilience? And that's where we get to,
That's a better story.
right. That's a better
That's
story,
a better
right?
story
That's
to tell.
because how many people do you know that you
I don't
meet
have that
that
story.
went through, you don't have that resiliency. You're doing it right now. You're telling it. You're hosting a
Man.
podcast. You're sharing. You motivated me. You inspired me to go and get to know Prince Harry and Oprah and
Was it
watch the right
amazing? Was it just
the
amazing?
me you can't see, right?
You can see. I mean, I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, right? The fact that you just lit up my brain that there's a series out there that's featuring some of these examples.
Who
In
would have
fact,
thought? I had no clue. Glenn Close, and the list goes on. And also not just Glenn, the kid from Syria that lost his brother. And you look at that and talk about trauma that will generation after generation. So I want to close with this, and I'm going to ask you a question that it's an example, and I'm sure everybody out there can relate to it. So I'm going to go on a date, and I'm excited, have some doubts. I physically am ready, mentally I'm ready, psychologically I'm ready, but as everybody else will have the same feeling, a little bit of a, is that person the one? And then I get stood up. Let's call it maybe not once or twice. So my wise brain is going to say to me, good for you. It's the person's not the one. So luckily you got saved, which is, that's my wise brain. My traumatized brain is going to say to me, I'm going to target the abandonment, the rejection, the worthiness, the blah, blah, blah. How do I win? Or can I win?
well, first of all, I mean, dating is it's changing. It's changing on the fly.
Yeah.
It's changing on the fly. But what, I think we have to look at whether it be, I have a client who came to me like when she first arrived in LA, and I think she was like a secretary. And she applied for like I think 50 resumes, and I never forget that the 50th one was like,
oh, wow.
That she got DreamWorks, right? And they like welcomed her and gave her the breakfast every morning, and like I just remember this experience of like, so this like willingness to just be committed to putting yourself out there. And it's hard because we are being triggered. We're emotional humans, but when we look at any change we want to make, committing to a process. So then we have to ask, right, is it online dating, right? If you use it a dating matter, or is it, do I need to look at a different way that I'm going about doing this?
The 50 resumes, let's use her. If you want
well, so interpersonal effectiveness is a skill. You use Wise Mind, which is a DBT skill, but interpersonal effectiveness. So yeah, if is resumes effective? I have some clients, 2 years, they've been sending resumes. Is that an effective way of getting people in front of you where you can learn about them? Yeah, right. So I think it's either way, it's about, right? So if the online dating people aren't showing up, maybe it's not the best way for people to get to know you, or you to sense from them whether they're interested or whether they're safe, right? Because this experience is rupture. There is a rupture there. If I just look at a profile and every time I set a meeting, people don't show up, right? Is it the medium that people are not really committed, right? Or is it me? So I think we do need a helpful
question. So yeah. Where does a person, from a healing perspective, say, you know what, it's not the right, when getting triggered, because I find myself in that position, when getting triggered, where do I regulate myself? I learned that term from the series, regulate myself, that I don't give energy to that trauma, and I can still go on date number 4, date number 5, resume number 6, job interview number 20, and getting rejected, abandoned, but I'm regulating myself that I am ready for the rejection because it's part of the process. I mean,
Right.
who's going to meet Mr. and Mrs. Prince? The first one, great if you do, but most of people don't, or the job, the 50 resumes. So how do I regulate ourselves to sustain that trigger that triggers the abandonment, the not worthiness, the etc.
A lot of internal work. Some of it is support, right? I think having, right, you may want to make a deal that you have a friend that you call after each date, right? That
Okay.
kind of reminds you. I think some affirmations are important. Maybe you have from your EMDR work, your belief systems that are up. I'm worthy, I'm good enough, I'm lovable. Maybe you need to read that to yourself before or after you go in, because there's no way to avoid being triggered. If we're, the minute we get into any relationship, they're gonna trigger all this. And in fact, we kind of want it to come up because it's an opportunity to, you may need a minute when you get back in your car after that person doesn't show up at Starbucks or whatever, to be noticed that you are tense, that you are angry. And the anger,
and rightfully so.
That's right. So if you can't call someone and just, right, I'm not going to curse on your podcast, but just scream, curse, and just, right, but just say how angry you are. I mean, you did that work. You showed up. There needs to be a validation that you made yourself vulnerable. And I think we want that. We need that to come from inside, right? Part of regulation is going, you are right to be angry, right? I have to have this discussion a few times that, sometimes we pause because we don't want to lash out or do something stupid. We're not sure why we're angry. We're not sure what the trigger is. And I think that's helpful. So I have this kind of like 3-day rule of being like, why am I still angry? What's happening here? What am I perceiving? Like I may have no understanding of why I'm so triggered by this person. And maybe this one person, you did feel a connection. Maybe you're more triggered because you felt there was so much and you got excited. That's the important piece of information, Sam, is that we get hopeful or excited. And that information is, what was it? Oh man, I saw that they had a similar background or a similar story, and I resonated and I felt a connection. Wow, that's important because you got all that. You got all that. So that information is important because that shows you maybe there is something in connecting to others who have inspiring works or who've been through injury and are working on it.
So the key is to find out what ignited me in the disappointment with that rejection that I can tap into. Oh, that's what I want.
Right, on the positive sphere, right? When we're traumatized, we're not paying attention to what Peter Levine calls, and this is not a political blue and red, but an emotional blue and red. What is blue? What is calming for you? What feels good, right? What feels great? When I'm talking to someone and they bring up basketball or donuts or New York pizza, all of a sudden I could sit there all day, right? Everyone has these things, right? So it's like, what are those things that are that for you? And so, yeah, when I see someone doing that and then they act the opposite, heartbreak.
I know.
When I feel someone is a part of my hometown or my faith or my culture or and I feel they did understand, right? It's important information because that means I did feel closeness, or I did feel the possibility of getting close.
And that's what you want to tap into.
Yes, because first of all, the fact
she stood me up, or she didn't call me back, or he didn't text me back.
Right, the ghosting, the person not showing up. That's the thing we have to remind ourselves. Who does that say more about? Who is that? Right, we often then, and that is where it becomes trauma. And maybe we learned, if you had some of these traumatic backgrounds, if you were abandoned, if you did have a alcoholic, abusive, mentally ill parent, where you say, right, the therapist, if you're a rescuer, like, maybe I am, right, then, oh, well, they're not showing up, so I have to work harder. I know that's important. That's an important message, right? Like, okay, wait a minute. What if instead of working harder, I just said they hurt me, this hurt, and maybe I need a boundary? What if I could just renegotiate, resolve this moment? So that's where the healing, this moment right now with this rejection helps me heal the prior trauma. It maybe helps me tap into it and become more aware of things, the ways I responded to it, which were before the cutting off, before the foreclosure.
I just got it. I just got it. Because I have a Scorpio moon. For those that don't know what that is, I mean, I'm easy to foreclose, to cut off, to shut down, black and white. So instead of renegotiating, I'll just get a bucket and put it over that person's head. I kind of shut it and send it home. So it's renegotiating. Interesting.
It's renegotiate, right? So that example, if I could see it that way, if I could see, yes, I got the trigger. I got upset. I sought support. I did some work on, wow, I even learned. It took me a little time. I trusted my body to swing back, that if I can sit with the anger, it will come back to a place of calmness if I can seek something to soothe myself. Maybe
And
it's a moment where I need
listen to your intuition.
that's it. Maybe that boundary, maybe for a week or two, I don't want to go on a date. Maybe that boundary right now is I just
Right.
need 2 weeks of healing myself because I'm tired of these idiots. And maybe that information gets me open to like, well, who was kind? Who smiled at me today? Whoa, that was weird. I noticed someone
Right.
made eye contact with me with a little longer and that felt good.
Right.
And sometimes we get that information at the same time while we're in pain, while we're setting the boundary. We're like, but because I didn't continue engaging it, I created a space for new engagement. And so that I think is good. That's it. It's a continual work. It's a continual of not staying in foreclosure.
Right, that term. This has been so much fun. Where can people find you if they want to seek counseling? I know you're in LA.
Yes, at Randy's Donuts. No, just kidding. You can find me at richardlistens.com, on Instagram at richardlistens, and Facebook as well as Richard Listens. I'm on Clubhouse Wednesdays at noon. We do a men's tribe meeting on the power of men's circles. We did circles on grief, but it's every week. It's the same time.
And how do you find you on there? Where is that at?
You can follow Men's Tribe, or you can follow Richard. It's actually, my screen name is Doc Zero there, which will be part of the Zero Method, which will be a book coming out hopefully later in 2021.
Very nice.
So, but I'm grateful, and the Richard Listens podcast is on iTunes and Spotify.
Thank you so much. As I said earlier, I've learned a lot about myself. And even now, as I'm doing this, about trauma and the shame and what I've been carrying, I'll just say to myself, if you guys out there are clear and good for you. So it's almost becoming a passion, and I appreciate you coming here and helping us unpeel the onion even more. There's no shame in the game. There's no shame in the game.
That's right. That's right. The more we can break down and create safety among us, and we do that right when we show a little extra care, whether it's a neighbor or somebody else who you feel may be holding back, anything we do that creates that permission in ourselves also opens up and those connected to us, right? When we start the healing from within. And I just want to thank you personally, Sam. And if I can help your podcast or this journey, I love the work you're doing.
And I just want to add this. I've also learned that you might not, if you don't think you're traumatized, but you might say something or act in a way that will trigger somebody else, and it will cause that person trauma for life. So be careful what you say and how you do it and how you say it. If I'm good and I'm righteous and I'm clean and I've got it all figured out, I might still hurt somebody else and trigger their trauma, and not even knowing that I did, because I'm being so self-absorbed in my righteousness. So let's be kind.
Yeah. Learning how to be, a reflective listener and ask questions and not pose our judgments or opinions, and learning how to be a witness. Sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do for someone else who's in a crisis is just be there and say nothing and just be present. Just that feeling that you're not alone in that moment. So right now, while everyone seems to be coming out, running the beach and doing everything, just remember, right, we are going to trigger each other. Everyone's trying to move way too fast.
And we're going to forget what happened a month and a year and a half ago.
That's right.
Like nothing has happened. I mean, the humans are so funny that way. To the audience, to the listeners, thank you for doing this. And again, I sound like a slogan every week, but it is a slogan, but it's not really a slogan. If you like what you've heard, and if you like what Richard's had to say, please subscribe. It helps me to do this week after week. I love what I do. I love this. It's labor of love, but I need you guys to just subscribe or click subscribe or download so we can do more. And thank you, Richard, again for doing this. Till next week, I'll see you guys soon. Be safe.
Anytime.
All right. Bye-bye.